Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. Today we're just going to talk about the media rounds that Chris Hipkins did and all the kind of things that he could have been asked by journalists but wasn't. When it came to asset sales and the recycling of assets, that was the big topic yesterday when Christopher Luxon turned up at a media conference and said that we should have a mature conversation about recycling assets and making them pay for themselves. So what did TVNZ do when Chris Hipkins came on this morning on breakfast? Well, they refused to talk about that topic. They didn't want to give the Labour Party some kind of political advantage, not now that TVNZ's board is actually being run by a Goldman Sachs banker, and you've got Paul Henry on the board. So basically, the lead topic there on the breakfast show was about TPM and the comments that had been made just at the end of Rawiri Waititi's statement to media yesterday that good conversations about working together with the Labour Party had been had by TPM. So the question was, can Labour work with TPM? And if Chris Hipkins said yes, then of course the right-wing media, meaning all the commercial media in New Zealand basically, would have a field day, and all of the commentators from the News Talk ZB to the platform everywhere would pounce in on this, saying, oh, well, there you go, look, what a circus show, what a terrible circus. Unlike, of course, the ACT Party and what it's done to the National Party because of weak negotiations, or basically the intention of the National Party at the top to just actually fulfill Atlas Network agenda. You take your pick. So the media were very, very much waiting in line, waiting to pounce. And Jenny May conducted this interview on breakfast this morning where all she wanted to talk about for a long, long time was TPM. Chris Hipkins basically said, look, they've got a long way to go, TPM, before they're in a position really to be talking about coalition arrangements with anybody. And that the conversation that he had there was more about how TPM had sorted themselves out. In other news around the traps in the last couple of days, media have kind of been bumping up the idea that this is not over, this is an inferno, this is like the biggest fire you've ever seen. This is going to go on forever, all the way to the election or something like that, because there's going to be division, there's going to be possibly 2 by-elections now. We know that there's going to be an appeal, etc. So things are going to carry on for a while. And in the meantime, Chris Hipkins has just been sticking to the same line. He's been saying this now for weeks and weeks. He's been saying, look, closer to the election, there will be a conversation about who Labour will work with and who they won't work with. So there's no point in asking Labour day after day, week after week, every week and day of 2025, 12 months before the election, whether they'll rule out TPM. But that's what we see happening anyway in our media. The same media that never ever asked National for a policy, never asked National who they're going to rule out, whether they're going to continue to work with David Seymour, whether they can continue to work with Winston Peters. So the media are very, very much focused on one political party. Remember, there's 6 political parties in power at the moment. Only one party gets asked for its policies early, and that's the Labour Party. They have to front up with their policies to the New Zealand media. Other 5 parties can just kick back and relax. They're not going to have any scrutiny or pressure at all. So they call that fair and balanced. There's no fear or favour, and media think it's a big joke if you do criticise them. That that's just ridiculous. We don't just pick on the Labour Party or TPM or the Greens when it comes to a scandal. So, that's what's going on there. So the good part of that interview on breakfast was really about TPM, and it was quite boring, really. Eventually, the topic got round to talking about the Cook Islands, and Chris Hipkins expressed his concern that what we're seeing here from Winston Peters and Christopher Luxon was, in fact, going to make our relationship with the Cook Islands worse. This parental kind of punishment, punitive approach to withholding our funds, $30 million for the Cook Islands, probably isn't going to help us work together or bring them back or encourage them. And so that was a fair point from Chris Hipkins. Over on Radio New Zealand, Corin Dan actually did the interview this morning. And in that interview, again, we started with TPM, and there was a whole lot of discussion about ruling things in and ruling things out. And in that discussion, it turned out, Chris Hipkins said, look, Rawiri Waititi had actually given him a phone call yesterday, and they'd had a conversation on the phone, which is probably the background of the remarks made by Rawiri to media. And basically, Chris Hipkins said that conversation was really about how they'd taken this action to expel a couple of MPs, and there was going to be, a more stable coalition arrangement possibly in the future. But Chris said, well, look, they're still a long, long way from having themselves sorted out yet. So, this wasn't really about arrangements for a coalition. So that was fair comment. And then the conversation did finally get round to asset sales. Corin Dan did bring it up. And the smart remark that Chris Hipkins made was regarding Treasury, because Treasury had said we need to sell assets. And this was very useful for the right wing, that Treasury, which is pretty much stacked with people from the 1990s and who come from that whole Ruth Richardson era, had come out and said, look, we need to sell things off in order to survive and get out of the structural deficit, because we're not going to grow our way out of things. And Hipkins basically said, like, the only thing that's being recycled here when it comes to recycling anything is this old failed idea that we need to sell the country off. So that had failed in the past, and you can look back at all the times that we've sold things and how it hasn't worked out. It's very short-termism. And this was actually backed up by Winston Peters, who had come out and said, look, the National Party have not fixed the economy at all. They haven't fixed the economy, and this is partly on Winston too, because he's part of the government. He hasn't fixed the economy. And what they do is they fill the hole every time with selling assets. And he went on to say that this whole idea that Nicola Willis has of getting rid of Chorus, flicking it off, taking the equity in the shares in Chorus and making or banking over $600 million to try and make your books look better, that was creative accounting. But back to the Radio New Zealand interview. So the Radio New Zealand interview did, and it was the only media organisation in the country that actually went there, talk about those asset sales. And Christopher Hipkins was pretty strong that we're actually trying to build up and protect our assets. We're not going to be continuing to do this thing that National do all the time, which does fail. Then there was a bit of a discussion again about the Cook Islands. Then we went over to the Herald Now, where Chris Hipkins was interviewed by Lion Ryan. And Lion Ryan, first of all, he wanted to talk about capital gains tax. But what did he talk about? Well, you see, all the Einsteins that are part of Dumbtown and listen to News Talk ZB all the time had been grumbling and moaning constantly. And what they'd come up with was that it just really wasn't clear to them that if you had a family home or a second family home, if there is such a thing, and you did improvements on it, whether you could actually deduct those and make claims on those. But Chris Hipkins cleared it up straight away and said, well, there's only one family home. And so if you're doing an improvement on a renter, then yes, it is deductible, because those improvements it's just the same. It's all just the same as in the Bright Line. And he'd already said this, but they hadn't listened. They weren't very clever, and that's why they call it Dumbtown. But they thought they'd found a big problem, and they told themselves that there was detail lacking when it wasn't. They just couldn't figure it out. So then Lion Ryan said, well, what about this? What about this? And what he was then loaded with was inflation. Why is inflation in there? Shouldn't you take inflation out of the whole thing? And Chris Hipkins is like, no, because that's the whole point. That's how you make a capital gain, through inflation, right? So they're basically just trying to undermine the entire thing over at Radio at News Talk ZB. And Dumbtown, didn't like this idea that inflation, which made them rich, would somehow be taxed at 28%. So Chris Hipkins dispatched that like, hitting a 6 over the boundary. And then, there was a bit of a conversation there. Once he'd batted away Lion Ryan's objections about its capital gains tax, concerning the low royalties that are paid on gold, minerals, and how that's historic and goes all the way back to the National Party, actually, but not Labour. And finally, I think there was a conversation there again about the Cook Islands. So that was just a quick wrap of what was said in the media rounds by Chris Hipkins. And I'd like to just reassert the the notion here that there was very little in the way of asset sales conversations. You've got this whole massive thing where neoliberals are founded upon the idea of privatization as one of their foundations. The other ones are austerity, deregulation, corporate welfare, and individualism. And those foundations are what the recipe is from Nicola Willis and Christopher Lutz-Kahn and David Seymour for election 2026. We need to get rid of this kind of thinking, cutting things, defunding things, cutting our way to prosperity, basically, just keep on cutting. In fact, Lion Ryan even said, cut, you've got to cut things instead of, growing things or investing things here in New Zealand. So, yeah, basically, we've got to get rid of neoliberalism, and it's time for my breakfast, so I'd better go now. Have a wonderful day. I'm here in Wheniche in the alleyway at Oniroa in Waiheke, and my coffee's going cold, so I'll talk to you all again soon. Have a wonderful day.
Welcome to G News, the good news.